So, Tetuan Valley Startup School presents Pablo Valcárcel, that is me, in You Better Call Saul. Well, it's not really You Better Call Saul, it's actually going to be a talk about startups, legal stuff, but theoretically the name was Legal Issues for Startups in Spain, which sounds kind of fancy and posh and nice, but it's really not. So I think the choice of Saul Goodman from Breaking Bad to represent what I consider the kind of lawyer you would need to deal with legal issues in Spain is rather sort of appropriate, if you ask me. That said, well, let's get started. So who is this shady guy in front of you? That is me. Well, my name is Pablo, you already know that. You've been waiting for me 20 minutes, I apologize for that. I'm the CEO of a startup myself, so I'm an entrepreneur. My startup's called TVSS X, and in a nutshell what we do is we provide location-based features for mobile game developers. I'm not going to go into details. If someone's interested, we can discuss it. But what's interesting about it is that we incorporated this startup in the UK, not in Spain, and that is because 2 years ago we were accepted in a European accelerator in Startup Bootcamp Amsterdam. So actually that's another topic you can readily ask me about, how to get into an accelerator, how to fool European investors and European accelerators to make them think that you're good enough to be in their accelerator when you're not. And so from the first minute my startup was sort of born international, which has been a really good learning experience. Of course, as you probably suspect, before being a startup guy, before being a startup CEO and all of that, I was a lawyer. I mean, I feel kind of like an alcoholic. In AA meeting, and Pablo, and I was a lawyer one day. Which is something I'm not proud of. There's nothing wrong with being a lawyer. I mean, there's all kinds of lawyers. But my point being that I do have a sort of unique perspective, a unique point of view on legal matters, both as a person that wants to get things done, being namely a startup CEO, and also as a person that needs to make things happen, while taking care of legality and formality and all of that, meaning a lawyer. So that's actually what you need to know about my background. Well, what are we going to discuss today? Well, when I was preparing for this talk and talking to Carmen and to the other guy and seeing what other years the content of this talk in Tetuan Valley has been, the funny thing is that I think that lawyers, when they talk to entrepreneurs, we really have this attitude that we really know what you guys need. Let me set you up because I need what you really need to know. And we tend to talk about all kinds of I don't know, in my opinion, really boring legal issues in these kind of talks, such as company incorporation, what do you need to set up sociedad limitada, or do you need to set up a sociedad anónima, or do you need to be autonomous, and how many shares, and blah blah blah, and how that's the administrador position, all that works. Or brands and trademarks, you need to register your brand as soon as possible, in case anyone decides to copy that sort of anonymous startup in Madrid. That's really important. And hiring, let's talk about hiring, because I'm sure you're going to start hiring people right away. So, I mean, this is my opinion ultimately. I mean, what I'm going to talk about today is ultimately my opinion. My point being about these three topics, there's actually a lot of information available outside Tetuan Valley. So if you go almost to any sort of organization promoting entrepreneurship in Spain, well, they're actually going to be able to help with these three things, especially with the first two. There's seriously a zillion websites about how to incorporate your company, what's the better structure for the legal society here in Spain. And actually, in my experience, 99% of the time for a startup is a sociedad limitada. I mean, it's no-brainer really. There's nothing else to discuss. But then in these talks, people go, oh, you should keep it to a sociedad limitada, which works like this. Well, ultimately, they're talking about saving the clock tower. What you're really interested in is actually going back to the future. I mean, this is not the real deal. The real deal is actually getting a company on the ground and start selling and start making money. And if you start making money and then it deserves, the whole project deserves actually creating a company, well, then you go and do all this stuff. But to begin with, it's kind of pointless. At least spending a lot of time discussing it. And like I said, there's plenty of information about it. And actually, Tetuan Valley has a wonderful, like, small booklet on legal stuff, which actually the guy that was coming today prepared, I think. What's his name? Santiago? I can't even...
The guy that was going to
give the talk? Yeah.
Guillermo.
Guillermo was the one that prepared the legal document.
Yeah.
Well, that's amazing because it covers all of this. So if you don't talk to me today, you can always default back to that document, which Carmen has, and it's pretty good. It's pretty clear and pretty simple, and you can ask me today. So my point was that what I think it's actually we should be focusing in is, well, to begin with, making sure that the company doesn't blow up. That's a nice start. And we'll shortly, well, you'll see what we're referring to. And getting everything ready to sell. And ultimately, going back to the future plans. I'm no expert. Like, I should also clarify that when I was a lawyer, I was working in public tenders, which is contratación pública. So that's really detached from the startup world, if you ask me. I'm familiar a little bit with all the legal matters because I have this background in law, but I'm no expert. I'll give you my opinion. That said, so the three things I wanted to discuss with you, plus those two, are, well, the first one is about preventing your company from blowing out, from imploding. And what I'm referring to, and actually Breaking Bad is a great example, is that at this stage, well, the company doesn't exist, you're just a bunch of guys trying to build something and sell it, and actually it should be like sell it and then build it, if you ask me. The worst, or what could happen, is that there's a disagreement between the partners. It's a very tense situation to a certain extent, because you're working with these people in your spare time, and you're demanding them to do stuff, and usually they don't have any sort of obligations, they're not working for you, they're not getting paid. What should do that? I mean, it puts a lot of pressure in a friendship or a team or whatever. So things can get really ugly. And the problem is that if they get really ugly and there's a huge discussion and there's a huge argument and you guys part ways, what happens then? Who keeps the IP? Who keeps the company? That's really messy. That's really scary too when you don't have this sort of thing sorted out first. It's like, oh shit. So I better get on well with this person because otherwise I don't know what's going to happen. And even if you want to sort it out, it's a really awkward conversation. It's like, well, I think we should talk. We should have the talk, about how we should split the company and all of that. So actually, the three things that you should be discussing, in my humble opinion, my humble experience, are ownership of the company, the famous split. Like, well, I'm going to have the 50%, you're going to have the other 50%, which is usually a recipe for disaster, if you ask me. Those having exactly the same amounts in the company, it's very nice, as a friendship, but it's not very practical as a business. But then I can go a little bit more about it. And, okay, so you guys should agree on the ownership, and it should be clear that there's going to be a company incorporated, let's say, in the next 6 months. Any IP, any product developed, it's going to belong to the company, not to you guys. So if someone leaves, the IP stays, and the work you're doing is for the company. And how the split is going to be. Without going into much detail, having exactly equal splits is a recipe for disaster, if you ask me. Even if the difference is very small, like 53 and 47% for two partners, that's way better than 50 and 50, if you ask me. It can be really small. Usually investors and the traditional mindset prefers really more sort of clear designations, like the CEO should have like a lot of equity so he can call the shots, then the CTO should have some equity to keep himself motivated, and then the rest should have almost nothing. That's like the traditional thinking about this. There's plenty of information about this on Quora. You can ask me, you can ask Carmen, there's plenty of people you can ask. Vesting. This is another really important thing that you should clear in the beginning. What happens if someone leaves the company? Like, okay, we agree, we're going to launch this startup, and me and Carmen, and we agree that, well, she's going to be 60%, I'm going to be 40%, whatever. And we start working, we work for 6 months, we have something, we start making sales, and at some point I say, well, you know what, I quit. Because I'm going to have a baby, and blah, blah, and I don't have time for this shit. But I want to keep my 40%, by the way. And she's like, well, does this make any sense? You're going to be working in the company. And I'm like, well, I don't care. You agreed on this, I'm entitled to this. It doesn't work out. Like, startups are really hard to pull off in the first 2, 3, 4 years. So in Silicon Valley, so the traditional standard, as far as I know, is like putting in place what they call vesting, and for usually for 4 years. which means that you're not entitled to your whole equity, to your whole shares, until the end of that period of vesting. And actually, even moreover, there's this thing at the beginning, which they call the cliff, which means usually during the first year, if you leave, you get nothing. It's not like equally distributed between among the 4 years, right? Like the first year, you get nothing. You leave, well, good luck. You're not entitled to anything. And, well, the guys in Silicon Valley are pretty wise with these things. That's in place for a reason, which is that the first 4 years for the startup are really hard, and people tend to leave. No hard feelings if this is in place. And this is actually a way of making people that are committed, that people are committed, and blah, blah. And of course, management, how decisions are going to be made. Usually the split, like the ownership, helps to decide these things, because if you are assuming that the stocks are votes, if I have 53% and he has 47%, then I have like the voting majority and I can make things happen. That's in principle. But in practice, you should have an administrador or some sort of manager that's able to call the shots really quickly without actually being necessarily referring to all the shareholders in the startup. And so this is another thing that should be clearly discussed. Who's going to be managing the day-to-day business? What sort of decisions he can make? What sort of decisions he doesn't make? And all of this, like the ownership, the vesting, management, it's usually what's in the shareholders' agreement. Or like they call it in Spanish, pacto de socios. Okay, so until now, are you guys following me? Because I don't want to start speaking like in legalese and nobody getting it. So we're more or less on the same page. We understand there's this document signed by all the shareholders, by all the startup founders usually, which decides these three things, and ultimately what's happening is that's preventing the company from imploding in the short term. Okay? So there's two ways of doing this. You can go to a lawyer and you can pay him. The plus is that, well, the shareholders' agreement is going to be top-notch, and it's going to be really solid and really well written, and he's going to think about everything. And there's another plus, that he's actually going to facilitate the discussion, because otherwise it's really usually an awkward conversation, like I was saying. Like, I've been in a couple of whatever, like failed startup projects, actual startups, and when you have that conversation, usually it takes a few hours, and everyone is sort of touchy and really tense, and it's uncomfortable. You need to have it. Having a lawyer is really good, because you have a sort of external party saying the ugly things, naming the elephant in the room, and like pointing all the things that you need to decide, and so on and so forth, okay? So that's something to consider. If you can afford it, I definitely recommend getting a lawyer, but then we'll talk about this later. I just realized I don't have the slightest idea of how long I'm taking, so if you don't mind, I'm going to take out mine. Okay. So it's 36, 17, reasonably good. Next point, well, the second legal matter you need to sort out is, of course, anything that gets you flying as soon as possible. I mean, if you're going to fly the DeLorean, well, just get it off the ground as soon as possible. If that's the plan, whatever legal hassle you need to get sorted out to make it fly, get it sorted out in the most affordable and simplest way possible. So what sort of stuff I'm talking about here? Well, I'm talking about typical things, like the terms and conditions for your website. Like this is ridiculous. I mean, I don't get it. Like many lawyers come here, oh, you should have a sociedad limitada. But then you're selling stuff on your website, there's really no discussion of what the terms should be there, and people don't know what to do. A lot of people, what they do, and I'm not condoning this practice, is just they go to the competitor's website, they check the terms and conditions, they copy them, and they paste it. And they paste them on the website. Of course, they sort of substitute the competitor's name by your own startup's name. And if it gets you going, just do it that way. I mean, if somebody says that I as a lawyer recommended this, I will deny everything. Hope this is not being recorded, because this is not, oh shit. I'm live. Well, I'm not talking as a lawyer here, guys. I'm talking as an entrepreneur. My advice as a lawyer is get a lawyer and get him to do the terms and conditions. As a startup CEO, I understand it. If you want to launch tomorrow, if you want to launch during startup school and get a program running, you need to do this, well, do it. At some point, get some legal advice and get this sorted out. Another issue that's usually connected to this one is personal data, at least within the European Union, which is relevant for all of us in principle. You're probably going to be gathering emails, you're going to be gathering phone numbers, and some sort of personal data. And the European Union regulations for this are pretty simple, to be honest, on one side, and then on the other side, they're pretty strict on how this data should be handled. Again, there's different levels of efficiency and on like correction handling this data. You could actually do everything properly and blah blah, but you could just put in the terms and conditions what's the purpose, what data you're gathering, what's the purpose of gathering that data, and remind the users that they have the what they call the ARCO, derechos ARCO, the ARCO rights, acceso, rectificación, cancelación, oposición. That could get you going. Again, I'm talking as a startup CEO, not as a lawyer. Keep that in mind. And finally, of course, and this makes sense, what are the contracts for customers? Depends on the business, because usually, again, in this kind of talks, we tend to assume that everyone has got a B2C product. Well, actually, who has B2C products here? Please raise your hands. B2C products, anyone? Who are selling to consumers directly? Okay, good. 3 people, 3 teams. Who has B2B products, like they're selling to other businesses? You guys, 2 teams, I see at least, or 3 teams, okay. So, especially like for both, like in my experience, for B2B, you're dealing like with corporate clients or with big customers, they expect to see a contract at some point. And then they can, well, customers, especially big customers, they can mess you up in many ways. Like, well, I don't want to go talk into detail about this, but like, they can really screw you up. Like, I mean, I don't know, my startup has been hired to develop features on demand, and the amount of issues we've had with that, like people that don't end up paying you, or what happens if they decide to cancel the contract? Are you entitled to some sort of compensation for the cost of opportunity that you have incurring? Is it in the contract? Because if it's not in the contract, good luck with proving anything. My point being, usually you need to get the legal stuff sorted out, the barely necessarily legal stuff to get your website working and get your company selling. So again, my professional recommendation is get some legal help for that. Or figure out some other way to do it. Use templates, copy and paste from all our competitors' websites, copy and paste from the Agencia de Protección de Datos, which are the ARCO rights. Do whatever gets you on the ground. But eventually, even if you do that, please keep in mind, you'll need a lawyer at some point to check this stuff, blah, blah, blah. So, since you can see I'm saying, well, you should get a lawyer. Oh, wow, this is such a good idea. Get a lawyer this, get a lawyer the other. Lawyer up, cold soul, you better cold soul. But then, how do you pick a good lawyer? Like, and how does this work actually for startups? Well, because one thing I want to make clear, of course, I think it would be really irresponsible if I said that you can handle this on your own for all the future, or I think it would be really unrealistic for anyone to expect that by attending a 30-minute talk, you're going to know anything that you need to know in the legal field. So just keep that in mind. But again, I said there are solutions to get you going, at least here in the startup school. So whenever you're looking for a lawyer, keep several things in mind. Well, first of all, lawyers, they're like doctors. They don't know about everything. If a lawyer has an answer for everything and he's apparently knowledgeable about everything, that's kind of sketchy, kind of shady if you ask me. Usually we're specialized in one field and we're really good with that one. And then we're like doctors. We're aware of how like medicine, law works, and with time and resources, we can look into other fields and we can help you and blah blah. Just keep that in mind. I mean, probably this is super self-evident and I'm retarded for explaining this, but in case somebody didn't know it, keep that in mind. Actually, well, I don't know if you can read it from there, I doubt it, but I love this. This is the Saul Goodman, the lawyer from Breaking Bad diploma, which is by the University of American Samoa, which is probably like one of these sort of weird states that doesn't really exist anywhere, and they're selling some of the titles in the internet or whatever. Well, whatever, it's really fine. My point being that just pick your lawyer properly. You know. Second tip, some lawyers, they don't really get startups. What do I mean with this? Like there's a lot of lawyers that they might treat startups like if they were regular, huge companies, or like customers with actual money, or with needs for sustainability and growth. I'm not really clear at the early stages of the startup. And of course, being lawyers, they're not going to tell you that. They're not going to tell you, well, you know what, I've never worked with startups, I really want to learn this, I want to get into this field. They're going to well, they might, because I'm assuming here and I shouldn't. Some of them might bullshit you. They might tell you, well, I can do all this stuff. blah, blah. And yeah, I've got plenty of experience working with startups. That's actually why we created this quote of like, sort of saying, I once told a woman I was Kevin Costner, and it worked, because I believed it. Again, so they're not gonna, it would be very rare that they acknowledge, well, I haven't really worked with startups, so I don't know, this is different, blah, blah, and this is gonna be a learning experience for me too. In principle, whenever you can, choose a lawyer that actually has had some experience working with all these startups. And if they say they have done it, just ask who are the customers. Because the expectations are gonna be related to the problems, are gonna be related to this money. Lawyers are expensive. That's why we don't use it. That's why we don't use them at the beginning. Especially like lawyers are not used to working with startups. I'll tell you what they do. What they do is they charge you per hour, and they don't tell you how long they're going to take to do a thing. So you hire a despacho, a bureau, to actually prepare shareholders' agreement. They'll be all smiles and handshakes. They'll invite you to their offices. You'll sit with them. It will take, well, you say, oh, these people are really professional, they're really spending time in this. And then you'll get a 5,000 euro bill, and you'll be charged, you'll see that you're being charged, whatever, like for 50 hours, 100 bucks the hour, and you'll be like, what? I cannot afford this, doesn't make any sense. And I'm telling you because I'm a lawyer, and this happened to me. So not that I didn't spend this much, but I ended up spending quite a fee, because they're really good at selling to their service, and this is the way of doing it. You just sort of talking with them, you close, there's a handshake, they send you this letter, you really haven't discussed the hourly fees, you didn't really have an expectation of how long it's going to be taking, and then you end up paying like several thousand euros fee. So keep that in mind. That's how they usually work. Then again, bureaus that are specialized in startups, usually in my experience, they might be doing two different things. They might be charging you a fixed fee, or they might get some equity, which is pretty sensible if you ask me, both of them. They're actually cheap in the end. A fixed fee is just that they let you know in advance, well, for shareholders agreement, I'm going to take 4 hours, every hour is going to be 100 euros, so you're going to be spending 100 euros. This is probably unrealistic. Regular bureau will charge you much more. Bureau that specializes in working with startups might be charging, I don't know, I'm making these numbers up, but might charge you around this fee, like 500 or whatever. I mean, I'm just making up numbers. My point being that you at least you know how much you're going to be charged at the end. Actually, I've even seen them do asking the startup, well, what's your budget? How much money do you have to spend in all your legal matters? And well, I've got 1,000 euros, I've got 500 euros, okay? So give me the money and then we'll do as much as we can with this. And I'll let you know how much that is in advance, so we can actually get things done. And then the other thing, especially in London, I've seen this as a very typical thing, they actually keep a percentage of equity, and of course they take it out of the paperwork, which is extra nice for you, because I mean, at least you don't have to worry about this, they're doing that for free. You might think, oh, we're really crappy and messy and blah, blah, these bastards are keeping my equity. But the truth is that at this stage, usually it's as much as a risk for them as it's for you. I mean, actually, given how much you're charging to other customers, the opportunity cost for them not making any money with you is rather high to some extent, so they're really investing in you. This is actually the case for, there's a startup in the Spanish ecosystem, really famous, called Cantox. I don't know if you know it. Well, you can look it up. Cantox, I think it was founded like 2.5 years. They do something related to trading foreign currencies. And I think actually like the first investors they got on board was a legal bureau in London. And the guys are all Spaniards, and they incorporated the firm there. Because this legal bureau saw it so clearly that it has so much value what they were doing, and they would get a lot of customers and a lot. But they said, well, we want to be part of this, we'll give you the offices, we'll sort all the legal paperwork for you, and we're going to have X% of equity. So it totally can be done. Again, the problem is, I'll give you some numbers from what I remember when I was as a startup CEO talking to bureaus, to despachos in the Netherlands. Like a non-very expensive despacho was charging around 250 euros or 200 euros for a senior, for the hour, a man hour of a senior person, and between 100, 150 for a junior person. And then very rarely, 50 bucks. And then assume the minimum any task is going to take, it's going to be a couple hours. So usually, this is a super rule of thumb, you'll end up spending, what, 500 euros per every item on that list. So ideally, with a budget of 1,500, you could get all that sorted out. I don't know, it depends. Well, all that sorted out, and actually remember that the priority is this. Really, even more than the other stuff. But again, you can do this yourselves. I omitted this slide before, I don't know why I did it. The shareholders agreement, you can get something done yourselves, but please just put it in writing and sign it. I don't want you saying, well, we discussed this, because that doesn't work out. Again, there's a degree. Like, if you're not going to sign it, at least put it in writing in some emails. At least do that, please, for God's sake. You can sign it, the better. Well, anyhow. So going back to the... When they take equity,
normally, you know...
It depends on the... I have no idea, guys. I would say it depends on the startup, the stage it's in, and I wouldn't give them more than, ideally, I'm going to make something out, more than 2%. Like, I wouldn't give an advisor more than 2%, even if I'm in a very early stage. But then again, they're going to be wanting to discuss valuation, and blah, blah, and hopefully they'll have a clue how startups are valued, because if they don't, they might be asking for 20% or something insane like that. It depends on what sort of services they're going to be providing to. So this was what I was thinking on discussing today. Two additional things. The managing director situation with regards to the Seguridad Social, Social Security. In principle, in Spain, he's an autonomo, and it's as strict as that. Like, I don't care that you're not making any money. You have to pay 250 bucks every month for Social Security for autonomo. And that's the reason why, as a CEO who was a lawyer, I decided to incorporate my company in the last minute. When you have money coming in before that, if you ask me, it's pointless. Why should be spending every month 250 bucks if you're not generating revenue? I don't see any sense. In the UK, it's not like that. Actually, I'll go now a little bit more into that. But the truth is that it's not necessarily like that. There are exceptions to that rule, that the administrator always needs to be autonomous. If he has less than 1/3 of the company and blah, 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 and there's a certain set of rules, basically, in short, is that if he's not the clear majority owner of the company and really has less than 1/3 of the equity, and blah, 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 he could be considered as an employee. But then again, the company someone needs to pay the Social Security. That's how it works in Spain. So there's no way around it. Either that he pays it himself as autonomo, or the company pays it. You're not going to escape that bullet. So that leads me to the suggestion of delay the incorporation until you're actually going to have some money coming in, either by investment, because you're making revenue. Okay? That's the first point. Regarding where to incorporate, when you're incorporating abroad, I'll tell you my experience. When we were accepted in Startup Bootcamp Amsterdam, they gave us 3 choices. One was to incorporate in the Netherlands, and they provided a lot of free legal assistance to do that. The other one was incorporating in the UK, and we had to pay it ourselves. And the third one was incorporating in Delaware in the US, and we had to pay it ourselves. So my reasoning as a lawyer was, well, I'm not going to incorporate in the Netherlands because I don't speak the language. And even if I'm going to get all this free legal advice, I don't feel safe not being able to read my own company documents. I mean, this is a good point. Whatever you do, if you're incorporating abroad, if things are in English, that's a help. Because even if you're a lawyer, you can get some feeling what all the paperwork is about. Even if you don't read it all, you just sort of glimpse at it. So wherever you're going to incorporate, please do it in a place that they speak a language you understand. If it's English, the better. Why English the better? Not because I'm super English friendly or whatever. It's because a lot of investors speak English. They might not necessarily speak Dutch, or they might not necessarily speak Spanish, which is another reason why I didn't try to incorporate it here. So if you incorporate in an English-speaking country, they might say, well, you know what? You are from a different country to mine, but I'm willing to invest in your company. But this is really long-term thinking. Don't necessarily try to think that big at the beginning. Or yes, it depends on your company. So as for Delaware or London, which I would say the 2 big choices, Delaware is super cheap, and if you want to go to the US and get investment from the US, it sounds like a sensible choice. But to me, it sounded nuts. I don't know if my startup ever is going to go to the US, if I'm going to ever get US investment, I don't have any clue. If I want to deal with European investors, they might be willing to invest in a UK incorporated startup. Because it's like a neutral ground, it's a neutral place, sort of well connected with the rest of Europe. There are a lot of VCs there. the English are very practical people, everyone speaks English, so it's sort of doable. It's a good middle ground sort of term. But that said, the upside is that the actual incorporation is super cheap. You can do it all online in 24 hours, and it will hardly cost you more than a couple €100. All of it, I'm saying, all the paperwork. You don't even need to go ever to sign out paper in the UK to incorporate your company. But then after that, it starts getting more messy. When you want to open a bank account, you need to go to UK. You need to have some sort of address there, some sort of postal address. There are a lot of companies actually offering that service online now, that you can actually hire, get a postal address and get all your paperwork, all your postal communications submitted there. But then again, when you want to do contracts and all of that, you might need to hire lawyers in the UK, which on one side is good because they know how to work with startups. In the other side, it's not so good because they're more expensive down in Spain. And in Spain, the chances of you having a friend who's a lawyer, well, to be honest, are higher, usually. So just do the math. I mean, I'm no expert in this matter, but my advice would be either Spain, because you're within your comfort zone. Spanish investors have, of course, no problems investing in a Spanish startup. You might have lawyer friends, or typical cuñado, or typical whatever, actually can give you advice, even if it's not very serious. I mean, the typical Saul Goodman that gets you going. That totally works. Whatever works, man. And if you actually have some money and you think you're going to be international very soon, I would recommend the UK. And then again, you are in charge, guys, so you have to run the numbers and decide. Go ahead, please.
At some point, you decide to go abroad and sell, I don't know, in South America, States, whatever. Do you need to have a company in every of the states? Or in one of the countries?
What would be the point? I mean, it depends on what exactly you're doing, but usually if you're selling through the internet, I don't see the point. No, unless you're really selling hardware and you need to have a distribution chain, and at some point it makes sense to have like a locally blah 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 incorporated company there. Usually it's really...
So just I send my invoices with my address,
Correct.
wherever it is.
Correct, yeah. It's as simple as that. So guys, really, that's it. Thanks for listening. Not sleeping up. If you have any questions, you can reach me at pablo@geosofic.com or Pablo _Valcárcel. Thank you very much.